The first sign that something was terribly wrong was the way the stars outside the window weren't moving the way stars were supposed to. Ethan noticed it while half asleep, his cheek pressed against the cold glass of the observation chamber, watching the silent ocean of space drift past the enormous window. Except the stars weren't drifting. They were sliding in perfect geometric patterns like pieces on a cosmic chessboard. He blinked a few times, hoping exhaustion was playing tricks on him. It was. The constellations themselves were shifting, enormous clusters of light repositioning as though guided by invisible hands. Vast metallic structures, too large to be ships and too deliberate to be asteroids, floated among them like silent architects of the galaxy. Okay, Ethan muttered to himself under his breath, rubbing his eyes. Either I'm dreaming, dead, or abducted by aliens. A soft chime answered him. He slowly turned. Two tall figures stood at the entrance of the observation chamber. They looked almost human at first glance, tall, elegant, wrapped in smooth armor that seemed grown rather than built. Their skin had a faint pearlescent glow, and their eyes shone with a soft blue light that shifted slightly when they moved. Their ears were longer than human ears, tapering gracefully backward along their skulls. One of them tilted its head at Ethan. "Subject is conscious," it said in perfectly clear English, though its voice carried a faint harmonic echo. Ethan raised one finger. "Before we continue," he said carefully, "I'd like to confirm something." The two alien soldiers exchanged a brief glance. "Yes," the taller one replied. Ethan gestured vaguely toward the stars, the ship, and the general situation. "I'm not on Earth anymore, am I?" There was a pause. "No." "Well," Ethan sighed, leaning back in the chair, "that's mildly concerning." The aliens stared at him. One of them slowly tapped a glowing panel on its wrist. "Psychological state appears stable," it murmured to the other. "Remarkably stable," the second one replied. Ethan pointed at them. "I can hear you, by the way." That seemed to surprise them. The shorter one studied him more closely now, its glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "You are unusually calm for your species." Ethan shrugged. "Look, if you wanted me dead, I'd already be dead. And if this is some kind of galactic kidnapping, panicking probably won't help my case." The two soldiers stared at him for several long seconds. Then, to Ethan's surprise, one of them gave a small, approving nod. "Logical." "Thanks," Ethan said. "I try." Silence lingered between them. Then Ethan tilted his head slightly. "All right," he said, gesturing around the chamber. "Next question, why me?" That question seemed to change the atmosphere immediately. The two aliens stiffened, not in aggression, in discomfort. The taller one finally answered. "You were requested." Ethan blinked. "Requested?" "Yes." "By who?" Neither alien spoke. Instead, the chamber door behind them slid open with a deep, resonant hum. Both soldiers immediately turned and stepped aside. And then Ethan saw the hallway beyond them. The corridor stretched far into the distance. Its walls formed from dark crystalline metal that glowed faintly with flowing currents of light. Tall figures moved through it, dozens of aliens, most of them similar in appearance to the soldiers escorting him. But every single one of them slowed when they saw Ethan. Some stared openly. Others whispered to one another in soft alien tones. One tall, noble-looking figure with golden markings across his luminous skin actually stopped walking entirely. He stared at Ethan like someone who had just seen a myth step out of a storybook. "That's him?" The noble whispered to one of the guards. The guard gave a stiff nod. The noble's eyes widened. "Incredible." Ethan pointed at himself. "Okay, now I'm officially uncomfortable." No one laughed. The soldiers gestured for him to stand. "It is time," the taller one said. "For what?" They didn't answer. Instead, they guided him into the corridor. As Ethan stepped out, the full scale of the ship became impossible to ignore. The ceiling towered nearly 50 meters overhead, lined with drifting holographic constellations. Transparent bridges crossed the vast chamber at different levels. Floating drones moved silently through the air like mechanical birds, and everywhere he looked, aliens were watching him. Whispers followed them as they walked. "That's the human. He looks so ordinary. Are we certain?" The Queen confirmed it herself. That last sentence made Ethan stop walking. The guards gently urged him forward again. But his mind had already locked onto one word, Queen. He looked at the guard beside him. "Hold on," Ethan said. "Yes." "Did someone just say Queen?" The alien hesitated. "Yes." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "All right, just hypothetically speaking." The guard waited. If a queen wanted to meet someone, Why abduct them in the middle of the night and drag them across the galaxy instead of sending a polite email? The shorter guard actually seemed to consider this. That is outside my authority. Figures. They continued walking. The deeper they moved into the ship, the stranger the reactions became. Some aliens bowed their heads slightly as Ethan passed. Others stared at him with open curiosity. One small, pale-skinned alien child peeking from behind a tall noble gasped quietly. "That's the human she spoke about." Ethan caught that. He frowned. She. The soldiers finally stopped before a set of enormous doors. They were easily 20 meters tall, covered in flowing alien script that shimmered like liquid gold. Two towering guards stood on either side, holding spears made of glowing energy. The moment Ethan approached, the guards lowered their heads. Not to the soldiers, to him. Ethan slowly looked behind himself. "Nope," he murmured, "still just me." The tall soldier stepped forward. "The audience chamber awaits." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Let me guess," he said, "the queen is inside." "Yes." He scratched his cheek. "And she specifically asked for me." "Yes." There was a long silence. Then Ethan sighed. "All right," he said quietly. "I really hope this isn't about that time I accidentally befriended an alien girl when I was 10. The two soldiers froze. For the first time since Ethan had met them, genuine shock crossed their glowing faces. The tall one slowly turned toward him. "You remember." Ethan blinked. "Wait," he said slowly. "Why are you reacting like that?" Neither guard answered. Instead, the massive doors began to open. A deep wave of light spilled into the corridor, and somewhere beyond those doors, across the vast throne chamber of an alien empire, a queen was waiting. The throne room was so vast that for a moment Ethan thought he had stepped into open space. The ceiling arched hundreds of meters overhead like the inside of a hollow moon, threaded with flowing rivers of pale light that moved slowly through the structure as if the building itself were alive. Massive columns of dark crystalline metal rose from the floor like frozen lightning, and between them stood rows of alien figures. Nobles, officers, diplomats, beings from worlds Ethan had never even imagined. And every single one of them turned to stare at him. The sound of the doors closing behind him echoed like distant thunder. Ethan stood there awkwardly for a second, hands in his jacket pockets, feeling like he had accidentally wandered into the world's most intimidating royal meeting. "Okay," he murmured quietly to himself. "Definitely not Kansas." The two soldiers escorting him stepped forward with precise discipline. The room grew quieter. Whispers passed through the court like a ripple through water. "That's him, the human. He's smaller than I expected. He looks harmless. That cannot be the one Her Majesty searched for." Ethan scratched the side of his head. "I can hear all of you, you know." A few of the nobles actually looked embarrassed. Others did not look embarrassed at all. At the far end of the enormous chamber rose a wide staircase made of polished black stone that seemed to drink in the surrounding light. At its peak stood a throne carved from a single piece of luminous crystal, glowing faintly like captured starlight. And sitting upon it was the most striking person Ethan had ever seen. She looked almost human. Almost. Her posture was regal, composed, the kind of stillness that commanded attention without effort. Her skin shimmered faintly with a soft, silvery tone, as if moonlight lived beneath it. Long dark hair fell over one shoulder like liquid shadow, and delicate elongated ears curved slightly back from her head. But it was her eyes that made Ethan freeze. They glowed softly, silver, exactly the same way they had years ago. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The court waited. Then the queen stood. The movement was graceful, effortless, and immediately the entire chamber bowed. Hundreds of alien nobles lowered their heads in perfect synchronization. Everyone except Ethan. He looked around. "Oh," he whispered. Then he awkwardly attempted a half-bow that looked more like someone trying to pick up a coin from the floor. That earned a few quiet murmurs from the court. The queen began descending the long staircase. With each step, the tension in the chamber tightened. Ethan suddenly realized something strange. The alien nobles weren't watching their queen. They were watching him. Like they were waiting for something to happen. The queen reached the bottom of the stairs. Now only a few meters separated them. Up close, the resemblance to the girl from Ethan's childhood was undeniable. Same glowing eyes. Same curious tilt of the head. Same faint smile that appeared when she studied him. But the small, slightly awkward girl he remembered had been replaced by someone powerful. Someone who carried the weight of an empire in the way she stood. Ethan raised one hand in an uncertain little wave. "Hi." Several nobles gasped softly. One of them whispered sharply, "He greets the sovereign like a friend." Another murmured, "He has no sense of protocol." Ethan glanced at them. "In my defense," he said, "nobody gave me a handbook." The queen's lips twitched slightly, just slightly. And that tiny reaction sent visible shock through several members of the court. She stepped closer. Now they were only a few steps apart. For a long moment she simply looked at him, not like a ruler examining a subject, more like someone searching for something they had lost a very long time ago. Ethan shifted awkwardly. "You're staring," he said. A quiet ripple of scandalized whispers moved through the court again. The queen ignored them. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm but softer than the grand chamber seemed to deserve. "You grew taller." Ethan blinked. "Well," he said slowly, "that tends to happen over the course of 15 years. The queen studied his face carefully. Her glowing eyes shimmered slightly. "You remember." Ethan shrugged. "I mean, it's not every day a girl with glowing eyes shows up behind your house and asks if earth apples are poisonous." A few nearby nobles exchanged confused looks. One whispered, "Apples." Another replied quietly, "Is that some form of human ritual?" Ethan noticed them. "They're fruit," he clarified. The queen suddenly laughed, not loudly, but it was unmistakably a laugh. The entire throne room went silent. Several nobles looked like they had just witnessed a solar eclipse. Did she just? "I have never heard." In court, the queen slowly shook her head, still smiling faintly. "You gave me 3, she said. 3 what?" "Apples." Ethan snapped his fingers. "Oh yeah, because you said your species might explode if you ate unfamiliar plants." A pause, "Reasonable precaution," she replied. Ethan nodded. "I respected the caution." The two of them stood there for another moment, studying each other. Then Ethan tilted his head. "So," he said, "you're a queen now." "Yes, and this whole galaxy-spanning alien empire thing." "Yes, and you kidnapped me." A faint murmur rippled through the nobles again. The queen looked almost amused. "I retrieved you." "Kidnapped feels more accurate." She stepped one pace closer, the court visibly tensed. Up on the balcony levels, several armored guards adjusted their stances. Ethan didn't notice. He was too busy studying her face. "You disappeared," he said. "Yes." "You never explained why." "No." He crossed his arms. "That was kind of rude." A few nobles gasped again. The queen's expression softened slightly. "I was taken from Earth that night," she said quietly. The room grew still. "I was not meant to remain there." Ethan's eyebrows rose. "Wait, you didn't run away." "No." "Then what were you doing there?" She hesitated, and for the first time since Ethan entered the throne room, uncertainty flickered across her face. The nobles noticed. They shifted uneasily. Finally, she answered. "I was hiding." That word sent quiet tension through the chamber. "Hiding?" Ethan repeated, "Yes." "From what?" Before she could answer, one of the tall nobles stepped forward. His robes shimmered with gold patterns, and faint ridges along his temples suggested a higher-ranking alien lineage. His voice was calm but edged with clear suspicion. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "perhaps it would be wise to remember where you stand." The queen's gaze hardened slightly. The noble continued. "This human is an unknown factor. The court does not yet understand why such effort was spent retrieving him." Several nobles nodded. Ethan raised his hand. "Just to clarify," he said, "I also don't understand that." The noble looked at him coldly. "That is precisely the concern." Ethan shrugged. "Fair." The noble turned back to the queen. "Your Majesty, if the rumors are true, that you searched the galaxy for this individual for years, then the court deserves an explanation." The room waited. The queen slowly looked back at Ethan. Her glowing eyes softened again. When she spoke, her voice carried across the enormous chamber. "I searched the stars for him," she said, "because when I was alone, hunted, and powerless." Her gaze never left Ethan. "He was the only person in the universe who treated me like I was ordinary." The court fell into stunned silence. The noble's expression tightened. "A sentimental reason," he said carefully. "Hardly worthy of." But the queen interrupted him. "No," she said quietly, "it is much more than that." Now every eye in the throne room was on her. Even Ethan looked confused. He said, pointing at himself. "Should I be worried about whatever comes next?" The queen finally smiled fully, and there was something almost triumphant in it. "You do not understand yet," she said softly. "You changed the fate of an empire." The entire court erupted in whispers. Ethan blinked. Then he slowly pointed at himself again. Pretty sure I didn't do that. The throne room did not erupt into chaos immediately. At first, it was only whispers, then arguments, then the quiet, simmering tension of powerful beings realizing that something deeply inconvenient had just been spoken aloud in front of the entire imperial court. Ethan stood there in the center of it all, hands still loosely in his jacket pockets, looking around like a tourist who had accidentally walked into the wrong museum exhibit. "Okay," he said slowly, "I feel like everyone here knows something I don't." Several nobles were staring at him now with open disbelief. One tall woman with pale violet skin leaned toward the golden-robed noble from earlier. "This is the being she crossed half the galaxy to find," she whispered. "He looks like a mechanic." Ethan pointed at her. Office worker actually, but close. The queen, however, was no longer smiling. She turned slowly toward the nobles, and the change in her posture was immediate. The warmth that had been there moments before vanished beneath the cold composure of someone born to rule. The whispers died down almost instantly. "My court appears confused," she said calmly. The golden-robed noble stepped forward again. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "with respect, the Empire faces fragile political balance. Rival houses question your authority even now. To elevate a human, an unknown outsider, because of childhood sentiment." It was not sentiment. Her voice was quiet, but the noble stopped speaking immediately. The queen slowly turned back toward Ethan. For a moment, the ruler of one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy looked not like a monarch, but like someone remembering something very far away. "When I was sent to Earth," she said, "my empire was tearing itself apart." The room grew still again. Civil war, assassinations, betrayals within the royal bloodlines. Several nobles lowered their eyes. "You were in hiding?" Ethan asked. "Yes." She looked back at him. "I was not meant to survive." That sentence hit the room like a shockwave. "The factions hunting my family believed I had already been eliminated," she continued. "My guardians hid me on a distant, primitive world where no one would think to search." "Earth," Ethan said. "Yes." A faint smile touched her lips again. "You were the first person I met who did not know what I was." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Well, to be fair, glowing eyes should have been a hint. A few scattered chuckles rippled through the court despite the tension. The queen continued. "My entire life before that moment had been performance, every word calculated, every gesture watched. Even as a child, I was never allowed to simply exist." Her gaze softened again as it rested on him. "But you treated me like a strange girl who didn't know how fruit worked." "That's still accurate," Ethan said. Another ripple of quiet laughter passed through the chamber. The golden-robed noble, however, looked deeply uncomfortable. "Your Majesty," he pressed, "none of this explains why a human civilian now stands in the center of the imperial court." The queen turned to him. "No," she said calmly, "it explains everything." She stepped forward until she stood directly beside Ethan. "When my guardians retrieved me from Earth," she continued, "the war had grown worse. My family was gone. The throne was empty. Every faction expected me to become another pawn." Her glowing eyes brightened slightly. "But I remembered something a human boy told me while we were sitting under a tree." Ethan blinked. "Oh." She looked at him. "You said that if people kept fighting over who deserved power, they would eventually destroy everything they were trying to rule." Ethan stared at her. "I was 10. "Yes." "You should not build political philosophy around things a 10-year-old says." She tilted her head slightly. "And yet it was the most honest thing anyone had ever told me." Silence filled the throne room again. "I decided then," she said, "that if I survived, I would rule differently." The nobles listened now, some reluctantly, some thoughtfully. Not through fear, not through manipulation, but through trust. Her voice grew stronger, and every time someone told me that such a thing was impossible, I remembered the one human who had treated a frightened alien girl as if she mattered. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "You're making this sound a lot cooler than it actually was." "You shared your lunch with me," she replied. "Well, yeah, you said your alien rations tasted like burned sand." That was accurate. Even a few of the royal guards quietly laughed. The golden-robed noble, however, stepped forward once more. "Your Majesty," he said, voice tightening, "even if this human influenced your childhood, that does not justify his presence here. Our enemies would see weakness in this. They will say the queen is guided by sentiment rather than strength." The room tensed again. The queen slowly turned toward him. "And what would you suggest?" she asked. "That he be returned to his world," the noble said firmly. "Quietly." before the court begins to question. I will not. The words landed like steel. The noble faltered. The queen's voice did not rise, but the authority in it filled the chamber. This human stood beside me when I was powerless, she said. Before titles, before armies, before crowns. She gestured toward Ethan. And today he stands before the entire imperial court without fear. Ethan lifted a finger. Minor clarification, there is definitely fear. Some of the tension cracked into quiet amusement again. The queen looked at him briefly with that same familiar smile. Then she faced the court once more. If the Empire believes kindness is weakness, she said, then perhaps it is time the Empire learned otherwise. Silence, heavy, absolute. Then something unexpected happened. One of the older nobles stepped forward slowly. His skin was pale blue, his eyes dim with age, but he bowed, not to the throne, to Ethan. The queen speaks truth, he said calmly. More murmurs spread through the court. Another noble bowed, then another. Some still hesitated, but the tide had shifted. The golden-robed noble looked around, realizing too late that the moment had already escaped his control. Ethan leaned slightly toward the queen. Is this normal royal politics? He whispered. No. Good. The queen raised her voice one final time. Let it be known across the empire, she declared, that humanity will no longer be considered an insignificant species. Shock rippled through the court. From this day forward, she continued, Earth will be recognized as a protected world under imperial alliance. Ethan's eyes widened. Wait, what? The queen looked at him again. You once shared your world with a stranger. Her glowing eyes softened. Now my empire will do the same. The massive chamber fell into a deep, resonant silence. For the first time since arriving on the ship, Ethan looked around not like a confused visitor, but like someone beginning to understand the scale of what had just happened. Thousands of alien eyes were watching him, not with curiosity anymore, with respect. He slowly exhaled, then he looked back at the queen. So, he said quietly, does this mean I'm allowed to go home at some point? She tilted her head. Do you wish to? Ethan looked out across the enormous court, the glowing architecture, the watching nobles, the endless stars visible through the distant windows of the imperial palace. Then he looked back at the girl he once shared apples with, the girl who had grown into a queen. He smiled a little. Maybe after we finish catching up.